Hello everyone, and welcome to Grimshaw Speakers, where we talk careers in IR with practitioners. Today I'm joined by AJ Manuzzi, who's currently a program assistant and Southern Regional Director at the John Quincy Adams Society. He was a legislative intern at the U.S. House of Representatives, and he did his BScs and Masters at American University, where he specialized in U.S. foreign policy and national security. Hi AJ, thank you for joining us.
Hi, I'm glad to come on. Thank you for the invite. I'm looking forward to speaking about my career trajectory, John Quincy Adams Society, and a more restrained and just U.S. foreign policy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. How about this? Let's start with if you can tell us a little bit more about the John Quincy Adams Society and kind of your role in it and what you do.
Absolutely. I am a program assistant and the Southern Regional Director for JQAS. We are, as you may have guessed, named for the 6th President of the United States, former Secretary of State, former diplomat. He was very involved in U.S. foreign policy and the crafting of the foreign policy of the early republic. Adams's view of U.S. foreign policy was rooted in a tradition that originated at the start of the American Republic when it was trying to consolidate and keep itself, secure its independence. And it is this tradition of restraint that is wary of entangling alliances, that views the United States, in Adams's words, as the champion of freedom in the world, but the vindicator only of her own. His sense of restraint guided his tenure as Secretary of State, his tenure as president, and it's a foreign policy legacy that we certainly think people could learn from today in the aftermath of a 2-decade war in Afghanistan, record defense budgets, and a number of conflicts the United States is embroiled in throughout the world as a result of its conception as its pursuit of military primacy and dominance. We think that the United States does not need to be pursuing this sort of strategy to secure itself and its interest, and instead rather a focus that takes a more narrow view of American national security interests, that engages with the world, but in a manner that promotes peace and prosperity for the American people and for the world through trade, cultural exchange, diplomacy, rather than the primary tool, and oftentimes the tool of first resort being the military instrument. What I do at JQAS is I'm involved with a lot of our educational programming, our work with students and young professionals. As my Southern Regional Director hat, I oversee our Southern campus chapters at universities throughout the southern part of the United States. Our campus chapters serve as important forums on foreign policy and the foreign policy of restraint. They organize things like speaker events, reading groups, all kinds of great educational and career-enhancing programming. To anybody who's listening out there in the southern half of the United States, you can obviously reach out to me, and I'm happy to help facilitate that process. In my other hat as a program assistant, I work on a couple of main objectives. Number one line of effort is the Marcellus Policy Fellowship. The Marcellus Policy Fellowship, of which I am an alum as well as the program manager, is an initiative that's geared towards building young people and young professionals for careers in foreign policy restraint. And it's all about building up your policy writing capabilities, your ability to engage and understand the big picture grand strategy topics that face the United States and the world today. And ultimately, you in the end will get to study a foreign policy topic of your choice and how it relates to U.S. national interests. You will publish a think tank style white paper on the JQAS website that you'll study this issue all throughout the essentially semester and produce that paper at the end. You will write an op-ed that you may be able to submit to a major outlet. And you also will produce a 1-page policy memo that you might leave behind if you were meeting with a policymaker. So I oversee selection and the program administration of that program. I highly recommend it as a former participant myself. That is one of my main lines of effort. I also work on other initiatives like our summer conferences, our reading groups, of course, which I'm happy to plug at any other point within this interview, but there you can see them all on our website.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That sounds very interesting. I think JQAS then kind of works a little bit it's a network on the one hand, but it's also not really a think tank, but you do publish a lot of policy briefs and policy papers, especially.
Yeah, JQAS is absolutely first and foremost a student and young professional network, as you just identified. It's all about building those connections, building those relationships, and educating people about U.S. foreign policy. We do seek to educate the public about these major issues, and especially the future young policymakers of America. We take the approach that, I don't know if you're familiar with the Federalist Society in the United States. It's a legal organization that tries to produce kind of a bench of conservative judges, and then if there's a conservative president who comes into power, they might submit a list of those judges that they want, and a lot of them are Federalist Society. We kind of take that similar approach, regardless of people's individual takes on the Federalist Society itself. We want to cultivate that next kind of bench of future foreign policy leaders in restraint, and it's a long-term mission, but it's one that we're certainly optimistic about, given how young people tend to now think about the big issues about U.S. foreign policy and their divergence from the traditional foreign policy establishment.
Gotcha. Thanks. That sounds very, very interesting. And I'm curious about, you completed your bachelor's and also your master's at American University, Washington, D.C., and now, as you said, you work at JQAS. How did you transition from academia to working in the field of foreign policy? And did you find any challenges or surprises along the way?
Yeah, this is a great question. To answer your first question, the transition, I was lucky at AU to have a supportive network of professors, of colleagues who were very interested in this stuff, even if they didn't necessarily take the same line that we here at JQAS do. But I think AU status as a policy school, especially at the graduate level, that allows you opportunities like I had to take a capstone course where we were actually helping the State Department work on U.S. foreign policy towards Central Asia. And this was just in the kind of immediate aftermath of the war in Ukraine, so it was very much more, I think, at the forefront. It was a really rewarding experience, and it's the type of experience that, not just being in the nation's capital, but also being at a policy school, I think benefited me a lot. I think, in terms of that transition, I would say that I could have done it really without JQAS. I think being a Marcellus policy fellow in that interim really helped me build the skills and connections that I needed to be somebody who is capable of engaging in the foreign policy discourse and knows the institutions of U.S. foreign policy, which levers, direct and implement U.S. foreign policy, and allowed me the chance to really specialize and get to know an area I thought U.S. foreign policy was lacking in its coherence. I think really, being around supportive people and getting the chance to work on a team of people aimed at the general same principle of promoting U.S. security really enabled me to think about the best way that I can build those skills. I think reading a lot was an essential element of it. I think the JQAS newsletter and being in networks like that, getting to know people was invaluable to my career. I will say, to your second question, one of the pleasant surprises I had was how willing people are in this space to engage with younger people. When I talk to people like that I interned with under on Capitol Hill, or came to speak at one of my classes at AU, or who were in the JQAS network or the JQAS staff, I was always blown away by their interest in helping me, getting to know me, and supporting me. This is a very competitive career space, but I think that people really do want to help you and support you. And I think I was surprised by the extent to which that was true. As far as challenges, I think, there's kind of a lack of infrastructure, especially for folks who think differently about foreign policy than a lot of the folks in Washington do. There's kind of like 2 or 3 pipelines where you do the same kind of thing, working with the same kind of people, and you think the same way. And, if you don't think the same way, then it kind of can be harder. But with the inroads that organizations like JQAS have made, we have realigned the incentives, to use kind of a business term. There are incentives and pathways for people who have heterodox thinking about U.S. foreign policy, who think seriously about these issues and just come to a different conclusion about what best provides security. I think another thing that was a challenge was this idea of imposter syndrome. It was very real. Showing up and being surrounded by incredible people with impressive resumes and things like that. You can certainly think, man, how did I get here? Like, I in no way know as much about any part of the world as these people do about their area of interests. And, I think what complemented that in my experience was the fact that I didn't always know that I wanted to do this. You will talk to people who want to go in foreign policy, and they've kind of known since they were 5 years old that they wanted to be a diplomat, or they wanted to go into the military. Well, that wasn't necessarily true for me, and I think getting to really dive in, I think I had to work almost in some ways harder than I would have had I known right away this is what I wanted to do. But it was rewarding, but it was a lot, and I think when combined with the imposter syndrome, that kind of was something that made me more reluctant to engage with other folks in this broader universe than it probably should have been.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned a lot of things that resonate a lot, I'm sure, with myself, and I'm sure with, a lot of people in our stage of our lives and our kind of very early careers and coming out of university, especially. So you mentioned a couple of things that I really want to go back to. The first one being specialization. You mentioned that you had definitely some difficulty choosing exactly what you wanted to focus on. And many of us and our listeners will have to face decisions about specializing within their field, especially in IR. How did you end up determining your specific focus, and kind of what was the road there, and what made you decide, and how did that impact your current line of work?
Absolutely. As far as how I determined specialization, I spent a lot of time reading about, studying Latin America and the Caribbean. I read a lot. I think having Spanish language skills was beneficial because I could read a newspaper from Chile and be like, okay, I know what this is talking about, and you'll get deeper than you might if you just read something from like Reuters. I really kind of got specialized in Latin America about when I started to get specializing in U.S. foreign policy general. I knew people who had connections to that part of the world, whether it was where they were from or something like that. I had spent time in the region, studying, living for a short period of time, and really got to immerse myself in the cultures of this place and their history and their relationship with the United States. A particular era of history that I'm interested in is just like kind of the late-ish Cold War, and hearing about the United States' support for repressive forces in El Salvador and things like that. One of my first Spanish teachers was actually married to, or rather led a screening of a film about the dirty war in Argentina and the military junta that we supported, and her husband was from Chile, where we did essentially very similar things, and so getting exposed to those stories kind of cracked the idea that I had about U.S. foreign policy as an exceptional force that brings peace and stability to the world with the more that it engages militarily. But once I became interested in that, I also became interested in other aspects of this, like arms sales and sanctions. And, I began to think about what are the ways where I can actually change US foreign policy. And those were very prevalent in the region, an easy way to do no harm. I still write a lot about this part of the world. I was actually working on an op-ed about the situation in Guyana, where Venezuela passed a referendum that pledged to essentially annex this area of called Essequibo, that's 2/3 the size of Guyana. I've written about Venezuela, I've written about Cuba, and I've written about Haiti lately. I think having those language skills, I think studying the history of the region and the history of the United States' engagement within that region is something that has allowed me to gain a greater appreciation for history and for think about alternatives to US foreign policy that actually advance peace and security in the hemisphere, and correct some of the narratives that we have about US foreign policy. I'm currently reading Greg Grandin's Empire's Workshop, which I highly recommend to anybody interested in this stuff.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. I mean, I'm personally very interested, like I mentioned to you earlier, before we started recording, I study Chinese as part of my degree. And I know that a lot of our listeners for sure at the LSE are either international, so they already speak multiple languages due to the fact of being born in a country where English isn't the first language, or just are interested in and do learn languages. I'm curious about if you could go a little bit more into how speaking Spanish in this case helped you with your career.
Absolutely. I think gaining that language capability, I was able to have kind of in-country experience and really get to actually speak with people in the country who had experienced US foreign policy. I was able to read works that were written in that language, from people in the region, which helped me gain a greater understanding of the history, but also the way that people think of the United States and those countries. I'm able to follow the news more regularly. Sometimes these countries will pop into the news in English language works, but I can kind of follow it more regularly and more in depth on a daily basis because I have that background. And I can, rather than just kind of wait around for an occasional Reuters article on what's going on in Cuba, I can read something that's coming from a speech given by the president of Cuba, or something that somebody in the Cuban American diaspora is writing about in Spanish. Also, having those language skills is something that can be beneficial in terms of employment. I got certain interviews and certain experiences just because I actually did speak Spanish, and I could understand these documents that were reports published in another language about, say, Chinese engagement in Latin America. I could also do things like translate those for social media and post them. And so it opened new doors for me and gave me the opportunity to engage with another audience as well, which ultimately just broadened my career horizons personally. So I encourage people, while they're still of our general, age cohort, their brains are very much capable of this, to learn more languages, to do that so that you can do those amazing things, and that they'll help you stand out and be an enriching experience for you, generally speaking.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a great point. And I think there's a lot of a worry, especially in our generation, around AI regarding languages for sure. Obviously, that makes everything a lot easier in terms of being able to access content that is not in a language is in a language that you don't speak. But I do think that especially when it comes to very sensitive or very detailed things, we still do need, absolutely, at least for the time being, we definitely need people that we can trust to do that work, because there's a lot of inaccuracy that goes on with AI and automated translations. And so, and the fact that you mentioned, I think being able to stay on top of the news, for example, is not really something you can do with AI. It's a lot more tedious. It's a lot more complicated. So there's definitely a lot of room there for people who have language skills to be able to utilize those and kind of use them in their career.
Exactly. Like our executive director is an Iran watcher. He knows a lot about Iran, but he also speaks Farsi. So he's really able to, listen to podcasts about the news that, are in Farsi and to follow that news with more regularity and more depth than he otherwise would be able to.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. I think that's great. The other thing you mentioned earlier is how obviously now the field of foreign policy, IR in general, but definitely the field of foreign policy is extremely competitive. And you mentioned imposter syndrome and how tough that can be. That's, I think, something that everybody who's listening can for sure relate to. So what advice would you give to students or any early career professionals who aspire to establish themselves in this field?
The first piece of evidence I would give, I just kind of gave a second ago, which was about the language skills. If you can have those, that will certainly work in your favor. You'll get to work on things that are more specialized, that give you more autonomy, and you'll be able to build up a kind of brand for yourself as somebody who follows these things closely, and is able to actually speak to people on the ground. So I think that's one. I think specialization in general overall is probably a good thing. If you are the West Africa watcher who is worried about U.S. security support for forces that are then going and doing coups, or if you are somebody who watches the Korean Peninsula, like there's a certain community within a community there that you can situate yourself in and ultimately position yourself in and get to know those folks and get to learn more just by being somebody who consistently cares about that thing and knows a lot about it and is able to speak, the separate sort of dictionary that comes with each specific issue set. However, at the same time, I would advise that people be at least conversational in the great powers and U.S. foreign policy towards like the great powers, thinking, China especially, but to a lesser degree, Russia. I think if, those are a lot of the most powerful actors in U.S. foreign policy and global affairs. And, everybody kind of is almost asked to have a take on them, and they will often touch on some of the same issues that you might be studying, whether it's China's engagement in Latin America or it's Russia's interventions and involvement in the Central Asian republics. They are unique kind of challenges for U.S. national security. And if you can at least kind of have at least some sort of understanding of their history, their government, what their foreign policy is, and great power politics in general, I think is good to understand. It'll really help you build ties with folks who follow this stuff and inform your own analysis, of course, as well. I mentioned the accessibility of people in this field. If you can, get coffee with somebody that you admire in this field, I was, interested in doing things like that. If you're attending cool events about foreign policy and getting coffee with people who really know the space that you admire, you're going to build relationships over time. You're going to build your own knowledge of the issue sets, but also how it interacts with the government. And, you're really going to, I think, separate yourself from, somebody who doesn't necessarily do those things. Finally, I guess not finally, I guess I have really two more points, but be a good writer, augment your writing skills. There's a lot of writing in this field. And, if you can be a good writer, not just like in academic writing, but also in kind of the policy writing, the public consumption writing, and be very good at different types of writing, then you will separate write yourself because people want to read good writing. They don't want to read bad writing. And your analysis will stick more in people's heads. It'll go further and further up the chain of command in college, your papers, applications, and things like that. So if you can be a good writer, people will have a better sense of who you are, what you believe, and they'll listen and hopefully be sympathetic, but certainly take you more seriously. Finally, be a good person. That is the most important advice probably here at all. So many people, who have great skills and great resumes and things like that. But, if you can't work on a team and work with people, who might have different backgrounds or different areas of interest, or things like that, you're going to be doing yourself a good service. So if you conduct yourself with integrity, if you're open to learning, and, very, have principles that you're passionate about, and you're generally kind to people, then that will be rewarded. That will be something that you will feel better about, but also people will want to work with you, hear from you, and otherwise support the work that you do.
For sure. Yeah, that's super important. I think I would say definitely the last point is true of, I would say probably any job or any career, but definitely those are things to keep in mind. And there are so many opportunities, especially in terms of what you were saying about writing. There's so many opportunities, I think, even throughout university and throughout college, where you can engage with.
Absolutely. You can build credibility and build a brand for yourself. And then just one other thing, sorry to interrupt.
No, please go ahead.
If you're interested in, talking with me or somebody on our team about your career and what options might look like for you, whether you should go to grad school, get a PhD, etc. We have a team full of folks at JQAS who are happy to meet with you and walk you through that. Feel free to go onto our website. My email is on there, and you can book a meeting with me, actually, or anybody else on our team if I'm not available.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great to hear. I have one last question. So I'm curious about, if you can put any shameless plugs as you would like to. It's the time for
All
you.
right.
But, I'm curious about some of the upcoming projects or initiatives that JQAS is excited about, and how can our listeners get involved or stay informed about your work?
Absolutely. So I mentioned at the outset a number of our great offerings and programs, one of which is our reading groups. The general premise of the reading groups is, at least if you're in the United States, we will mail you a copy of the book. If you're not, we'll kind of work with you to see how that's possible. But we will mail you the book, and then we'll either send you a Zoom link if you register remotely, or we will buy you dinner if you're in the DC area and you're coming to the in-person session. But it's a great opportunity to read some of the great literature on IR, on stuff preparing you for your career and professional development, but also to meet a lot of the great folks in our network across the country. I certainly wish I had taken greater advantage of this when I was in undergrad and in grad school. If not only for the free books, but the opportunity and the connections and the people to build and we have a couple upcoming ones. One of them, there's two kind of contrasting ones about Henry Kissinger and his legacy after the passing of that controversial and singular statesman. We have one on Greg Grandin's Kissinger's Shadow, which is a more critical take on Kissinger. And then we had one, A World Restored, which is a more perhaps sympathetic take on Kissinger. We've had those in the works. We also have ones usually every month, and we announce those on our website. You can sign up on the registration link on our website under for students, reading groups. We also have our own podcast, the Security Dilemma podcast, which I'm on occasionally, but not as much. It's usually my colleague Patrick Fox and our executive director, John Gay. But we interview experts on U.S. foreign policy weekly about the topics that you all care about. We've had some really awesome talks. Our first guest was Stephen Wald of Harvard. We've had Emma Ashford at the Stimson Center. We've had Van Jackson, the former Obama administration official and now dissident professor, as he calls himself, in New Zealand. We've had some really amazing people speak on a breadth of different topics, and it's usually a lot of fun to have a stake in, and also have a stake in producing, and also to listen to. So great way to keep up with us all the time, especially if you're not in DC. I also, will again mention the Marcellus Policy Fellowship. Our next cohort application cycle is live. It goes live through January 14th. That's the application deadline. It's just on our website. And, if you have any questions about that, if you have any, sample topic proposals you would like me to look over, feel free to send me a draft. It's all for people who are interested in careers in U.S. foreign policy. There's no U.S. citizenship requirement, which might be relevant to this audience, but you'll really have the opportunity to dive into U.S. foreign policy, your topic of interest, and get to hear from some amazing scholars and practitioners, and be part of the great cohort as well. So those are some of our big initiatives that we have coming up down the pike. You can get in contact with me. You can follow me on X/Twitter. I am at AJ Manuzzi. That's capital A, capital J, capital M if it matters. And then my email is aj.manuzzi, again, MANUZZI, at JQAS.org if you have any questions about the society, want to meet up for a Zoom call or something like that. You can also follow our newsletter on our website, JQAS.org. Our newsletter has hand-picked job listings, fellowship opportunities, career advice and resources, as well as just kind of news and things that people in our network have been writing and talking about. And you can sign up for it under the resources tab on our website. Finally, we're also on social media as the society. We are JQA Society on X/Twitter and Instagram. And you can follow the work that we're doing at the national office, some of our chapters are doing throughout the country, and otherwise become acquainted with the John Quincy Adams Society. So I certainly welcome anybody who wants to engage with us, and we would love to have you in this fight.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was lovely to speak to you, and
I'll make an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, I'll link everything that you just said in the description, so you can find it there. Thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.